This week we're going to show you how to set up a LEED schedule to show compliance. So we're going to take those additional 3 fields I just talked about, and now we're going to show you how to add in compliance. So as I mentioned in the schedule, there is 3 parts to this. If we're doing a visibility analysis schedule, right, there's 3 compliance requirements. Is there daylight and 75% of space? That's this requirement. Do the windows in the space have a minimum of 42-inch horizontal view? That would be this requirement. And then assuming that these 2 meet both requirements, then you can have your final column here show, does this space meet all the requirements in order to be approved for that LEED criteria. And so this is a way that you can build a schedule based upon the other piece we just talked about, and now adding in the compliance components. So how do we add in the compliance components? First thing we're going to want to do is to create 4 additional properties into our property manager. Those properties are going to be daylight and 75% of space for compliance. So basically it's going to say, looking at what we've done here, does it meet the requirements for the 75% space? And I'll show you that in a second. And these 2 will work together. But they're going to want to add in compliant horizontal view and compliant for visibility. Okay, so here's how it works. First, as I mentioned, we need to add in this one for daylight and 75% of space for compliance. And this basically is using the same expression that we used in our daylight and 75% of space that I talked about earlier in the early part of this schedule. Except the problem is that this formula that we create, this expression, has this percent at the back end of it. For whatever reason, ARCHICAD doesn't like that in this property, so we need to create, in other words, in order to use this for the compliance part of the schedule, so we need to create a separate property that's identical to this, but only as a sum. Okay, so it's just a simple formula. And this formula is going to be sum. You're basically going to add in a new, you're going to say add, you're going to pick expression, and then you're going to create a formula that is sum, EQ8 2.2 area with direct line of sight. So we're going to pull that property, divide it by calculated area times 100. That's all that this formula does. Okay. Based upon that, you can see that this one was called daylight and 75% of space for compliance. You'll see that now we're going to create a new property. And this new property is going to say, is it compliant? So now we're going to create a property that says the expression is going to be an area. It's going to be an if statement. If this particular formula here that we created above, okay, is greater than 75. So in other words, the LEED requirement requires that we meet 75% or more of the daylight in the space. So we're just going to say if this formula above here meets 75% or greater, then show calculated area, true. The first part is true. If it does not, then the value is false, it's 0. So it would look like this. So if the room area, right, in the daylight space, so we're looking at the room area here, right, it's 95, this one meets it, right, so it's 91.51%. Okay, that's where all this is coming from, is our room area and area of line, directs, all this is coming from this, right? So coming through here, we can see there's 2 at the bottom. These do not meet it. This is just slightly under the 75% threshold. So it shows as dashed, okay, because it's not going to meet it. And that's what we're doing here. We're basically saying that these areas that do not meet that direct line of sight that we talked about earlier in this, now we can actually put a compliance piece in here that shows whether it meets it or not. Then, using our options we put in earlier with the checkbox and yes or no for the horizontal view at 42 inches, remember this is this part right here, not coming directly from the model in the sense of pulling from the section, but we can have a checkbox here that basically we manually turn on or off. And so we can just kind of go through our spaces and say, does it meet it? Does it not? If it does, great. Then it's going to have a yes here. If it does not, then it's going to have no. And so what we can do now is we can set another column here that basically says, is it compliant to horizontal view? Okay. And reason why we put that here, even though there's this one, right, is because what this is doing is this is going to give us a little bit more, because when we place this in here, it's going to actually say, okay, if, oops, sorry about that. If this horizontal view checkbox, okay, is true, and the compliant 75% of daylight is true, okay, then it's going to show, I'm sorry, if, let me back up. If this horizontal view checkbox is true, okay, then it's going to show the square footage over here. All right, so you can see that because ultimately what we want to do, it needs to be compliant for both here and here. Okay, so it's going to show compliant for this space, it's going to show compliant for that space, and so now it's going to say, okay, if this checkbox is true, then it will show the space here, which is what it's doing. Okay, and based upon that, this is where our final piece comes in. What this does is says, if these two columns, okay, are both true, then it will turn on and show meets. If they're not, if they both don't match, okay, so in this case, it shows that this one is compliant, but it's not compliant here. It will show it doesn't meet that. And so the whole point here is that you have two columns here that if they're both equal, it will show in the final schedule that it meets it. And this becomes a really nice way of you having a schedule here now that shows compliance for each of these different requirements that you need.